Stellar Blade is a difficult game, one that demands split-second precision in its defense and the ability to recognize and know how to defend against a ton of different enemies and their multi-hitting combo attacks. Some of that is just going to come down to memorization and practice, but there's also plenty of tips that we can give to help ease you into Stellar Blade's difficulty. With that said, here are our 12 essential combat tips for Stellar Blade. Attacks in Stellar Blade are partially non-committal, which means that you can switch to a guard or dodge during the startup of an attack, but once the attack can deal damage, you're locked into that animation until it's over. This allows you to be fairly aggressive with the ability to switch to defense when the need arises, and you should use that to your advantage. You don't have to just trade turns with the enemy. So ultimately, be aggressive, but also don't get greedy, and understand that if you're getting hit even though you feel like you pressed the block button in time, it's probably because you were caught in the middle of an attack at a time when you were unable to guard cancel. There are 8 unique combo strings in Stellar Blade, and while you don't need to know or use all of them, you also don't want to default to just using the same one in every situation. Longer combos will do more damage, but are prone to get interrupted. Remember that previous tip: once your attack can deal damage, you're locked into that animation until it's done. So attacks like the third hit of Incursion 3 that has you swinging your sword multiple times is a prime spot for you to get interrupted by the enemy. The number next to the name of the combo also refers to its level, which can come into play with certain exospines and gear pieces that grant extra damage for using moves at a certain level and above, so just keep all of those factors in mind. There are a few resources that you need to worry about in Stellar Blade, including beta energy, burst energy, and your shield, but thankfully stamina isn't one of them. There's nothing stopping your use of normal attacks, blocking, and dodging, but keep in mind that blocking an attack will cause small amounts of chip damage, and more so when your shield is depleted. While it's preferable to taking a hit, you'll still need to mix in parries rather than just guarding if you don't want your health to slowly whittle away. Speaking of, just like in Sekiro, parries in Stellar Blade are not a suggestion, but a near requirement. When enemies glow red, they will launch into a nearly uninterruptible string of attacks, and the only way to come out of it without taking heavy damage is by parrying as many of the attacks as you can. To parry, you'll have to guard just before an attack hits you. Mashing on the guard button doesn't help either, so you'll need to actually learn and pay attention to the timing of an enemy's attacks. This is one of the big reasons why Stellar Blade is a difficult game. There's a few pieces of good news though. First, every time you parry an enemy attack, you take away from their balance. And once all of their balance is gone, you're able to land a devastating attack of your own that deals huge damage. Another piece of good news is that if you're struggling with parry timings, you can invest in a skill on the survival skill tree called Focus Boost to increase that parry window and also equip both gear and exospines that even further widen that window. And if all of that isn't enough, you can also just bump the difficulty down to story mode at any time, which slows the action down and turns parrying and other defensive techniques into quick time events to help you get through tough battles. One last tip regarding parries: you don't have to parry every single attack in a sequence. Sometimes it can be easier to just make sure that you block the first few hits, and then keep an eye out for attacks that have easier rhythms to try and parry. Just be sure to have the health and shields to survive the chip damage from blocking. Stellar Blade is a game that encourages guarding more than dodging. The timing of a perfect dodge versus a perfect parry are about the same, but if you're too early on a parry, you'll still at least guard against the attack, while if you're too early on a dodge, chances are you're getting hit. Not to mention that you don't affect the enemy's balance if you perfect dodge an attack. Certain attacks, nevertheless, will require you to dodge out of the way, and if you dodge just at the right time, you'll get a perfect dodge that allows for powerful counterattacks if you manage to pull it off. Just be aware that trying to dodge out of the way of most attacks is a risky move, and unless you're low on shields and stamina, you should probably just block an attack if it's capable of being blocked. For enemies with shields, every attack you land will deplete a portion of their shield meter. You'll do more damage when their shields are gone, but another benefit to removing an enemy's shield is that when the shield gets depleted, the enemy will stagger back. So don't neglect using moves like Shield Breaker, Pulse Grenades, and mines that specifically target shields. It will help you out in the long run. It's easy to forget about consumable items, but grenades can be crazy helpful in a pinch. Pulse grenades will attack an enemy's shield, Sonic grenades will attack an enemy's balance, and shock grenades will knock an enemy to the floor, buying you time to heal or use one of your longer combos without fear of retaliation. You can also eventually use mines, which will deal big damage to an enemy's shields, and are a great way to initiate fights against enemies that have seen you but are still a ways away. The special kinds of unblockable attacks that enemies use are all color-coded, and require a different response to counter. Yellow means that an attack is straight up unblockable, and while you can attempt to perfect dodge these moves, as previously stated, the perfect dodge window is generally pretty small, and it's a big risk with minimal reward to go for the perfect dodge. The best thing to do is usually just run away. Attacks with blue or purple can be avoided with either a blink or a repulse respectively. There are two flashes, the first when the enemy flashes, and the second when your sword flashes. The sword flash is when you should input either forward or backward with the dodge button. If it's blue, hold forward and press dodge. If it's purple, hold back and press dodge. The last color you need to worry about is when an enemy flashes red, as we've already talked about. This lets you know that a flurry of attacks is coming, and parrying is your best option. Beta skills are special abilities that take beta energy to use, and they all have their own special purpose. Triplet will stun and interrupt enemy attacks, Shield Breaker reduces an enemy's shield, making them more susceptible to further attacks, Shockwave attacks from a distance, and Slash attacks the entire area around you and stuns enemies. And all of them have special properties or extra attacks that can be unlocked in the skill tree. Triplet, for instance, becomes Quadruplet. Much later in the game, you'll gain access to burst skills, which are extremely powerful abilities that cost burst energy as opposed to beta energy. Burst energy can pretty much only be obtained by using a blink or repulse to avoid a blue or purple flashing attack from an enemy, using a retribution attack after depleting an enemy's balance, or by using a beta chain. Beta chain is a skill that you must unlock on the skill tree, and it's something that you should definitely do, especially once you unlock burst skills. Basically, you can hold down the last button of a combo string in order to use a more powerful burst chain version of the attack at the cost of 1 point of beta energy. But if it hits, you'll gain a point of burst energy. Burst chains are also especially good as well because they will usually interrupt an enemy combo, giving you an opportunity to continue your offense. Save up your burst energy for big boss battles, as 3 of the 4 burst skills not only do big damage, but also put the opponent on the ground, and allowing you to either follow up with more damage or give you time to step back and heal. Stellar Blade will always first and foremost be a melee action game, except in very specific moments of the story, so while you should always default to your blade, don't forget that you also have a wrist-mounted gun that you can use to hit enemies from a distance. It can be used to quickly finish off enemies that are weak, deal with enemies that try to keep their distance from you, or simply deal high damage to stationary enemies without having to get in range of their attacks. And finally, when you're outmatched or low on health restoratives, there's no shame in running away and living to fight another day. The penalty for death in Stellar Blade is fairly minimal, so you don't have to worry about that Souls-like thing of losing your skill points or anything if you die and are unable to reclaim them after dying again, but occasionally, checkpoints can be rather far away from tough encounters. So know what you're getting into before you commit to a fight, and if things turn dicey, it's usually pretty easy to escape just by sprinting away. And those are 12 essential combat tips for Stellar Blade. Thanks for watching, and for more Stellar Blade, make sure to check out our video on what skills to get first, along with our ever-growing wiki over on IGN.com. Thanks again, and for everything else, keep it here on IGN.